There's a little bit of a thunderstorm raging outside, so I'm just gonna have to hope that it doesn't interrupt me too much. Backgrounds of Gothic literature, Paradise Lost. I'm spending a little bit of time, ooh, lightning. I'm spending some time with Paradise Lost tonight because I am working through this personal curriculum in Gothic literature. And even though the earliest Gothic text I assigned to myself to read was a 1764 novel, I know that there are some early modern English texts that are considered to have been really influential on the formation of the genre, that some of the early writers were pulling from Shakespeare and Milton and other writers of that time period when this genre was kind of beginning to emerge, when the idea of what constitutes the Gothic was being kind of solidified. And early modern English lit is my shit, you know, that's where I live. That's what my PhD is in. That's what I know. And so I didn't have to assign myself to read in their entirety any of these influential texts like Macbeth or Hamlet or Paradise Lost, but I did want to, at the beginning of my curriculum, spend some time looking at them with the Gothic in mind and with the intention of putting the texts into conversation with the other literature that I'm reading right now, rather than just thinking, what do I already know about these texts? Reading them again, even if it's just in part, even if it's just browsing and skimming, and thinking, what am I noticing anew about these texts? Or what does reviewing these texts make me think about in the Gothic lit that I've just read? He is reacting to the same because I am interested partly in the visuals here, I'm trying not to get too caught up. I feel like I've never really paid attention to just how I don't know how many times I have read this since the first time I read it, when I bought it when I was 17 years old at a Borders bookstore to read for my AP Lit class. And since then, you know, I've read it in undergrad courses, in grad seminars. I have taught it when I taught Intro to Brit Lit to undergrads. I have written papers about it. I have just picked it up off the shelf and flipped through it and revisited it. I think of all the books that I have kind of held as companions, this might be the one that has been the most a companion to me for the longest time. And I think that one of the reasons that my relationship with this text has been so sustained and so continually rewarding for me is that it is so long and dense. And I read it when I was so young, and so I have changed so much in the intervening years. And it feels like every time I pick it up and browse through it, I notice new things. It gives me new things, or I bring new things to it that help me notice passages or descriptions or quirks of language or references that I didn't notice on previous reads. And that's definitely the case this time, that this time I'm bringing something new to it. I'm looking at it through a lens that I haven't before, because this time as I'm picking it up and I'm flipping through it, I have some new texts in mind that I'm trying to put it into conversation with, because I'm on the heels of reading my first two Gothic novels, The Castle of Otranto and The Monk. And I've also just read a short essay excerpt of something written by Anne Radcliffe, who is the author of The Mysteries of Udolpho. And this little essay of hers that I read was a discussion of the differences between terror and horror in literature. When I was reading the novel The Monk, I was really struck by the visuals surrounding the supernatural elements. In Castle of Otranto, it was a little bit more goofy almost. It was, helmets falling out of the sky and walls crumbling and thunderclaps pealing in the distance, appropriately enough. But in The Monk, it was figures wreathed in flames and really tactile descriptions, upsettingly tactile descriptions of corpses. And it was, flashes of light and a magic mirror that at first showed only colors and vague shapes that gradually resolved themselves into the image of the person who you wanted to see through it. And so coming off of that, having that so fresh in my mind and my imagination, and coming now into revisiting Paradise Lost, I was really curious about the visuals, about what kinds of imagery I was going to notice in this. One of the things that can happen when you are very familiar with a text is that you can kind of let your eyes slide over parts of it and you can stop taking in every detail of it. And so coming into this now, wanting to pick up on the details of the visuals and the imagery, I was engaging anew with some descriptions that feel very familiar to me. The descriptions in book 1 of hell and the lake of fire that parts as Satan points his fingers, and the ground that is like fire made solid. And then in book 2, the descriptions of the characters' sin and death. Those ones really were landing fresh for me as not only very visually evocative, but very, very horror, very macabre, and very intense and crazy. It's easy for me to think about what I know about this book and think, yeah, okay, book 2, we meet Sin and Death, and Sin is kind of half woman, half scorpion snake creature, and she's got these like hellhounds around her and whatever, and we find out that she is technically Satan's daughter because she Athena'd out of his head when he had the first thought of disobedience against heaven. It's so established in my mind, it's so familiar to me. I've talked and read and written and thought about it so many times that I've kind of stopped taking notice of all of the details of the description, and they are really powerful. I know, breaking news, John Milton is an excellent writer. You heard it here first, folks. But really, in the days since I finished reading The Monk, I've been reflecting back on a lot of the kind of horror elements of that, the really viscerally upsetting, visually horrifying elements of that. And having that fresh in my mind, I think I noticed fresh just how fucking crazy the descriptions of Sin are. Not only is she woman down to the waist and then has these scaly folds with a stinger at the end that again is like kind of snake, scorpion, amorphous monstrosity. She is not only surrounded by hellhounds, but the hellhounds are constantly braying, and you have this cacophony of noise. And when they are tired of being outside her body or when they are startled, they take shelter in her womb, where you can still hear them braying. So there's these echoes of hellhound howls coming out of this half woman, half monster's womb. And while in her womb, they are constantly devouring her and then crawling back out of her. And then the description of death is really cool too. We've seen Sin standing there all horrible and scaly and wreathed in hellhounds, and then there is another shape next to her, and it is described as, quote, that other shape, if shape it might be called, that shape had none distinguishable in member, joint, or limb, or substance might be called, that shadow seemed. How can you describe it as having a shape when you can't make out anything identifiable about it? How can you say that it even has substance when it seems that it's just this shadow? All you know is that it's standing there, dark and giant and horrible and unsettling. And that is really horror-y, really mysterious, really spooky. And like I said, I was really focusing in on these descriptions of otherworldly elements, things outside of anything that any reader would have seen before. And I was thinking, as I was reading that description, about Anne Radcliffe's discussion of horror, which is more like, ooh, I got spooked, and terror, which is a lasting sensation of fear that really gets in you. I might be slipping back and forth between two things I've read. I'm not sure that I'm keeping straight in my mind Anne Radcliffe's discussion of horror versus terror, and then I was reading some excerpts from the Edmund Burke on the Beautiful and the Sublime. Anyway, in both cases, and Radcliffe is influenced by Burke, he's the one who comes first and who she is drawing from. The idea of terror is linked to the obscure, as in that which can't fully be seen or grasped or understood, as contributing to that sense of terror and that sense of being overpowered by a sensation and by a force, an external force. And that is just so present in this description of death, because it is the strategic obscuring of specificity, because whatever we can imagine in our mind is going to be more horrible, more terrifying than a single finite thing that we can look at. As soon as something is made specific and tangible, even if it is horrible, it's less horrible than the multitude of potential horrible things in our mind. And so when something is obscured, it is terrifying more than something that is outright described can be. If you want to read some really intense shit, you can go to Paradise Lost, book 2, starting at, around line 770. That's when Sin describes things. I will just take any excuse to revisit this book and talk about it more. I have absolutely never gotten over reading it, and have never gotten through rereading it without being struck all over again by just how compelling of a character Satan is. And every time I revisit it, the idea that Milton was of the devil's party without knowing it just holds more and more strength. If you're starting with Satan, if you are giving us Satan almost as our audience proxy, that we are entering into this book, this epic, viewing hell through Satan's eyes, and we are hearing the first words spoken by a character be him looking around him at hell and seeing how far he's falling and just desperately trying to hold on to any scrap of self-worth and any kind of purpose, and trying to do what little he can with what remains of the free will he has after being cast out of heaven. How were we not supposed to root for Satan and to love Satan when 250 lines into the epic, he says, the mind is its own place and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. What matter where, if I be still the same? And what should I be, all but less than he whom thunder hath made greater? Here at least we shall be free. The Almighty hath not built here for his envy, will not drive us hence. Here we may reign secure, and in my choice, to reign is worth ambition, though in hell. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. How am I not supposed to read that and go, good fucking point, Satan? It's my kind of guy. Every time I get to another one of my little assigned readings on this personal curriculum, I'm just grateful all over again that I started this. And I'm only 21 days in, who knows what's going to happen, how much my motivation is going to hold up. But so far, every new thing I read or old thing I read just makes me feel more and more motivated, because just reading through a theme it feels like I have so much purpose and clarity in what I'm reading through. And just the fact that this project, this little personal study, is leading me to notice new things about my favorite piece of literature ever, or just engage with it in a new way, is so satisfying and so fun. And I can't wait to see what I'm going to notice about Macbeth and Hamlet anew when I get to reviewing those, if anything. Maybe it won't be anything, and that's fine, because time spent with Macbeth and Hamlet is still time well spent, even if I don't notice new things. To Gothic literature, to intellectual curiosity as an end in itself, and to Milton's Satan, my best friend. I'm gonna go read book 9 of this and think about whether the love I discovered for Satan as an 18-year-old and the love I discovered for Spike as also an 18-year-old have anything to do with each other. If I were of any religious persuasion, I might take the loud thunderclap immediately after me saying I love Satan as some kind of sign. But I'm not religious, so instead it's just some fun narrative punctuation. Goodbye.